What actually makes a game a perfect 10 out of 10? It's not just beautiful visuals or a massive open world. It's not a long runtime or a high budget. Some games hit that mark with a story that stays with you for years. Some do it with a combat system so satisfying you can't put the controller down. And some do it with an idea so original that you genuinely can't believe nobody thought of it before. We're gonna look at the 23 games scheduled for today. If you're ready, let's get started without wasting any time. Assassin's Creed Origins. Most open-world games give you a map full of icons and call it a world. Origins gave you ancient Egypt and made it feel like a place people actually live. Bayek of Siwa is one of the best protagonists the Assassin's Creed series ever produced. A Medjay, a protector, a man carrying a grief so specific and so human that the game's more epic moments never overshadow it. The story builds slowly and it earns that slowness. By the time it opens up into something bigger, you're already invested in the person at the center of it. But the world itself is what stays with you. The Giza Plateau at sunset, the markets of Alexandria at full chaos, tombs that feel like they were meant to be discovered rather than designed to be completed. Origins runs around 30 to 40 hours for the main story, and the side content is genuinely worth doing. This was the game that proved Assassin's Creed could grow up without losing what made it interesting. Everything about this game moves. The city, the enemies, the camera, your character, none of it sits still for a second, and that's entirely the point. Sunset Overdrive is built around one idea: staying airborne is always better than standing still. You grind rails, bounce off awnings, vault over enemies, and chain all of it together into a continuous flow that feels less like a combat game and more like a very aggressive dance. The moment it clicks, when you stop thinking about what button to press and just move, it becomes genuinely addictive. The tone is self-aware without being exhausting about it. The humor lands more often than it doesn't. The enemy designs are creative in the specific way that only comes when a team is clearly having a good time making something. It runs about 10-12 hours for the main story and doesn't try to stretch beyond what it needs to be. There are very few games that feel quite this alive while you're playing them. Yakuza Like a Dragon, a crime drama that turns into a turn-based JRPG, about a man who genuinely believes the world works like a Dragon Quest game, and it absolutely works. Ichiban Kasuga has more enthusiasm than sense, more optimism than experience, and more heart than practically any protagonist in recent memory. He gets betrayed by someone he trusted, loses everything, and decides with the earnestness of a man who has spent his entire life in a world that made him love video games, that he's going to build a party and fight back. The game commits to this premise completely, and the result is somehow both hilarious and genuinely moving. The turn-based combat is the best implementation of the JRPG format in the Yakuza series. Every job class changes how you approach fights, and the enemy designs keep things from ever getting routine. The story runs about 50 hours and earns every one of them. Like a Dragon respects both its genre and its audience. Ball X Pit. Sometimes a game does exactly what it says on the tin, and turns out that's all it needed. Ball X Pit combines two separate gameplay loops, an Arkanoid-inspired action stage where you defeat monsters by bouncing balls against them, and a city builder stage where the resources you collect can be used to improve buildings that unlock new characters and abilities. On paper, that sounds like a strange combination. In practice, it produces one of the most satisfying loops of the year. Each run involves using and leveling up more than 20 playable characters, each with their own unique abilities, and battering hordes of enemies with magic-infused balls, utilizing a fusion system to combine over 80 different balls into increasingly powerful combinations, alongside augments from over 60 passive accessories. The genius is in how those two halves feed each other. Every run through the pit makes your town stronger. A stronger town makes future runs deeper. You're always progressing, you're always discovering something new in the combinations. And what Ball X Pit teaches you is that's really all you need to make an engaging video game. Ghost of Tsushima. There's a moment early in Ghost of Tsushima where you realize the game isn't going to give you a waypoint arrow. The wind moves, the grass bends, and you follow it. That single design decision says everything about what kind of game this is. Sucker Punch built a world that wants to be explored on its own term, not checked off a list. Jin Sakai's journey across a Mongol-occupied Tsushima is visually arresting in a way that holds up every time you crest a hill or step into a bamboo forest at dusk, but it's the combat that earns its place alongside the atmosphere. Sword duels are ceremonial, almost ritualistic. You square off, you read your opponent, you commit. The contrast between that formality and the chaos of fighting multiple enemies at once gives the game a rhythm that very few action titles match. Around 20-25 hours for the main story. You will not want to leave. Lies of P. The question hanging over Lies of P before it launched was whether it could stand on its own, or whether it would just feel like a Souls-like set in a fairy tale. The answer arrived quickly. This is its own thing. The Krat setting, a city of mechanical puppets gone violently wrong, dressed in Belle Epoque grandeur, is one of the more memorable environments From Software-adjacent games have produced. The atmosphere is genuinely oppressive in a way that makes exploration feel earned, but the combat is what sets it apart. The weapon assembly system, attaching blades blades to different handles to change movesets, creates a flexibility that rewards experimentation. And the block system, where precise timing on a parry damages the enemy's weapon, adds a layer of tactical thinking to every fight. The story surprises you, the lore rewards attention, and by the end, Lies of Parge has established itself as something the genre needed, a game confident enough to be itself. Red Dead Redemption 2. You can fish in this game, just fish. Sit by a river, wait for a bite, and watch the light change on the water. And somehow that feels like playing the game, not stepping away from it. That's the thing about RD2 that nobody who hasn't played it fully understands. It's not a game that happens to have a living world in it. The world is the game. Arthur Morgan is one of gaming's finest characters, not because of what he does, but because of how he moves through a world that's slowly dying around him. The 1899 American frontier feels like a place with a past and a timeline, and you're arriving near the end of both. The story takes about 40 to 50 hours. The everything else has no ceiling. At some point you stop doing missions because you're too busy existing inside the world. Very few games have ever managed that. Split fiction. Co-op games usually ask two players to work together on the same problem. Split fiction asks two players to step into two completely different realities and keep reaching back to help each other. Hazelight's follow-up to It Takes Two takes the split-screen co-op format and runs it through a science fiction lens. Zoe and Mio are two writers whose stories literally lead into the real world around them, and the gameplay shifts to match. One level plays like a cyberpunk platformer, another like a fantasy brawler, another like something you've never quite seen before. The tone swings wildly, and it works because the game commits fully every time it changes direction. What makes Split Fiction special is how it uses co-op to say something real about collaboration and creative ego. It runs around 12-15 hours, and every chapter feels like a separate game worth playing. One of the most inventive co-op experiences in years. By day, you run a shop. By night, you descend into a dungeon to find more things to sell. Sounds simple, becomes completely consuming. Moonlighter is about Will, a merchant who wants to be an adventurer, trying to do both at the same time. The dungeon crawling is tight and satisfying. Roguelite structure, escalating danger, meaningful resource decisions, but the shop management layer is what makes it different. You have to learn what items are worth, how to price them, how to read your customers, how to stock the right things, and both halves make the other more meaningful. It runs about 12-15 hours for the main content, and it has the quality of a game that was clearly made by someone who genuinely loved what they were building. The Hitman team was always the right choice to make a James Bond game. Now we know why. IO Interact brought everything they learned from years of intricate assassination playgrounds to 007 First Light, an original origin story for a 26-year-old Bond who hasn't quite figured out what kind of operative he wants to be. The missions sprawl across European locations and offer the kind of layered approach to objectives that Hitman players will recognize. Multiple routes, multiple solutions, a premium placed on reading a room before you walk into it. The combat is built to feel like Bond, efficient, controlled, nothing wasted. Hand-to-hand sequences feel like actual fights rather than choreographed takedowns. The writing gives the character room to breathe, and Lana Del Rey's title track earns its place. First Light feels like the Bond game that should have existed 10 years ago. The fact that it's here now is enough. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. The question of whether a first-person Indiana Jones game could actually capture what makes those films work had a simple answer: yes, entirely. Machine Games made a game that understands Indiana Jones at a structural level. The whip isn't just a tool, it's a character trait. The improvised combat, the running away from things faster than you run toward them, the sense that Indy is always one step behind the solution but moving too fast to stop. The Great Circle captures all of that without ever feeling like a museum exhibit of a franchise. The world is packed with things to discover, side content that feels like actual archaeology rather than collectible hunting, set pieces that escalate with real momentum, and a story that respects the source material while doing something new with it. Around 20-25 hours, it leaves you wanting more in exactly the right way. The first game asked whether Kratos could be a father. Ragnarök asks what happens after tries. The sequel doesn't reset the emotional work of 2018. It builds on it, takes the relationship between Kratos and Atreus, and pulls it in directions that are genuinely uncomfortable, genuinely earned, and occasionally devastating. The combat expands significantly. More weapon, more abilities, more enemy variety that actually forces you to adapt, rather than just switch between tools. But what stays with you is the writing. Ragnarök is a game about fathers and sons and what we pass on to each other, and it handles that theme with more sophistication than most films get near. The scale is enormous. The emotional moments land harder because of it. Around 30 to 40 hours for the main story, more if you dig into every realm. Kratos has never been more interesting than he is here. Need for Speed. There's a version of street racing that exists only at night. Wet asphalt, neon reflections, the sound of a tuned engine bouncing off building walls. Need for Speed 2015 built an entire game around that specific image, and it commits to it so completely that the sun never once rises over Ventura Bay. The world is always always dark, always raining. And somehow that never gets old, because the city was designed to look its best exactly like this. Light bleeding across puddles, headlights cutting through fog, the blur of a perfectly timed drift leaving streaks across the road behind you. 5 separate mentor storylines pull you in different directions: speed, style, build, crew, and outlaw, and each one reframes how you approach the same open world. The car customization is deep enough that no two players end up driving the same vehicle. The handling sits between simulation and arcade in a way that rewards learning without punishing newcomers. It never got the full recognition it deserved at launch, but driving through Ventura Bay at 2 AM with a car you spent an hour tuning, that feeling is its own argument. Ultimate Spider-Man. Before the modern Spider-Man games existed, this one got there first, and it did something that none of the newer ones have fully matched. Ultimate Spider-Man put you inside the comic book, not a game inspired by the comics. The visual style, the writing, the color palette, the way panels existed in the world. It was 2005, and Treyarch made something that still feels distinct from anything that came after it. The web swinging was different from Insomniac's version. Slower, weightier, more comic book physical. The story put Peter and Venom in genuine conflict in a way that felt like reading an issue that mattered. For anyone who grew up with this game, going back to it is its own kind of experience. For anyone who never played it, you're looking at the foundation of everything that came after. It's short by modern standard. It doesn't need to be long. Detroit Become Human. You make a choice. The story branches. Someone you've spent hours with is gone, and you have to decide, do you reload the save, or do you live with it? Detroit Become Human is built around that question. Quantic Dream's Android story is not subtle in what it's about, but it doesn't need to be, because the execution is precise enough that the emotions work regardless. 3 protagonists, 3 perspectives on the same crisis, hundreds of possible outcomes. The game actually tracks the decisions on a flowchart you can review after each chapter. Most branching narrative games hide how deep their branches actually go. Detroit shows you. Marcus, Kara, and Connor are distinct in ways that make switching between them feel like reading 3 different novels in the same world. The story runs about 10-12 hours and plays differently every time. Some games give you choices. Detroit gives you consequences. No rest. This is the game the Ori creators made when they decided to stop making the kind of games that made them famous. Moon Studios took the hand-painted visual style that made Ori breathtaking and rebuilt an entirely different kind of game around it. A precision action RPG with Souls-like combat, isometric perspective, and a world that feels genuinely handcrafted rather than generated. Every room has been thought about. Every encounter has been designed around the specific tools you have access to at that point. No Rest for the Wicked has continued to receive positive feedback for bringing a top-down experience that meshes with Souls-like gameplay, stunning graphics, an environment that feels alive and truly interactive, and combat that responds naturally to inputs. It launched into early access in 2024 and has been growing substantially since, with 1.0 targeting late 2026. Getting in now means watching something build toward what it's becoming, and what it's becoming is something special. Cyberpunk 2077. The launch is a different conversation. This one is about the game that exists now. Night City is one of the finest open-world environments ever designed. Vertical, layered, genuinely alive in a way that makes simply existing inside it rewarding. V's story, dying slowly while sharing a skull with a rock legend played by Keanu Reeves, is driven by performances and a script that would hold up in any medium. The build variety is real. Different playstyles don't just change how combat feels, they change how the world talks back to you. With Phantom Liberty added, the narrative reaches a conclusion that reframes everything before it. The city pulls, the writing keeps you there, and somewhere around hour 30, you realize you've stopped doing missions because Night City keeps finding reasons to interrupt you, and you keep letting it. Watch Dogs 2. The first Watch Dogs was competent and serious, and a little forgettable. The sequel threw out the tone, changed the city, and created something that genuinely found its own identity. Marcus Holloway in San Francisco feels like a character who enjoys what he does, and that energy spreads to the player. Hacking in Watch Dogs 2 isn't a tool you use when nothing else works. It's the language the game is written in. You're redirecting traffic, hijacking cranes, sending police to the wrong location, turning security cameras into surveillance networks that work for you. The city rewards creativity. The open world is dense with things that feel worth doing rather than things that feel like obligations. Co-op adds another layer that the game handles better than most. It runs around 20-25 hours and rarely asks you to do the same thing twice. San Francisco has never looked better in a game. More importantly, it's never felt like yours the way it does here. Most stealth games give you a puzzle and a solution. Hitman 2 gives you a puzzle and says find your own solution or make one. The sandbox mission design that IO Interactive spent years refining peaked here in a way that's still remarkable. Every level is an enormous environment filled with NPCs, routines, opportunities, disguises, and systems that interact in ways the developers couldn't have fully planned for. You can spend an hour on a single mission and leave feeling like you've barely scratched the surface. Then go back and do it completely differently. The game rewards observation, patience, and creativity. ability, but it never punishes you for failing to be patient or creative. There's always another approach. The escalation missions add longevity beyond what the main content offers, and the level design across the campaign is some of the finest ever made. Every target feels like a puzzle worth solving. Every solution feels like yours. Deathloop. What if you woke up on an island where everyone was trying to kill you? You couldn't die permanently, and the only way out was to figure out how to murder 8 specific people in a single day. Deathloop is a puzzle that runs on logic. Coltvan is trapped in a time loop on Black Reef, and breaking free requires not just finding targets, but understanding how the island works, where people are at what time, how events connect, which information unlocks which possibility. The game gives you everything you need to figure it out. The satisfaction of putting the pieces together yourself, without a guide, is genuine. The gunplay and powers make navigating the island satisfying in its own right. The Juliana invasion system, where another player can enter your game as an assassin, adds unpredictability to a game that might otherwise become routine once you know the solutions. Arcane built something unusual here. Deathloop trusts you to be interested enough to figure it out. Noita. Every pixel in this game simulates every single one. Noita is a roguelite set in procedurally generated caves, but describing it that way misses the point entirely. The real game is the physics. Fire spreads through wood, water flows downhill, oil ignites, acid eats through stone. Every material interacts with every other material according to rules the game never explicitly explains. You discover them by accident, by catastrophe, by the specific kind of joy that comes from watching a chain reaction you didn't fully intend unfold across the screen. Spells are combined into wands, using a logic that is deliberately opaque and endlessly deep. The average run ends in disaster. The understanding you carry into the next run makes it less disastrous. Eventually you start to see the shape of the game's systems, and the depth below that is genuinely staggering. Noita is the kind of game people spend hundreds of hours in and feel like they're still learning. That's not a warning, that's the point. In 2011, Human Revolution asked what it meant to augment the human body with technology. In 2016, Mankind Divided asked what happens when society decides it hates the answer. Adam Jensen in Prague is navigating a world that has turned augmented humans into a second class, and he's one of them. The political subtext is not subtle. It's not trying to be. The game trusts you to engage with what it's saying, while also letting you engage with how it plays, and the immersive sim design is as deep as anything in the genre. Stealth, combat, hacking, social manipulation, every path through every mission is legitimate. The Prague Hub is one of the finest open environments in immersive sim history, a city block where every building has a reason to exist, and every resident has a life that continues without you. Mankind Divided was undersold on release. Going back to it now, it's clear what it got right. Tunic. You pick up a manual page. It looks like a scan from an old instruction booklet, the kind you used to get with cartridges in the 90s. Except this manual is for the game you're currently playing, and it's in a language you can't read. Tuning is a discovery game, not in the sense that there are things to find, in the sense that understanding how the game works is the actual experience. The Fox protagonist has no dialogue, the world has no waypoint, the combat is harder than it looks, and the manual, assembled piece by piece across hours of play, gradually reveals not just mechanics, but secrets that fundamentally change what you thought the game was. There's a specific feeling you get in Tunic, when something you've walked past a dozen times suddenly reveals itself as something you were meant to figure out. That feeling is rare, really rare. Tunic is built to give it to you repeatedly, across a runtime that expands far beyond what it appears to promise. Don't look things up, just play.